Okay, this February 11th, 2025 regular meeting of the Fairfax County School Board Public Engagement Committee will now come to order. We were going to start with student voice, where Ms. Marin was going to give out a report, but we'll go ahead and move on to the Community Advisory Committee Toolkit update until Ms. Marin comes in, and then we'll switch back over to that. The July 18th School Board approved a motion. Oh, okay, good. She's here. We can wait a few minutes for her to settle in. Okay, so yeah, I'll just say we had a robust discussion about how to incorporate the student voice more intentionally with our board work. Last month, Ms. Marin and I participated in an informative VSBA webinar entitled Enhancing Student Voice in School Leadership. Ms. Marin will share her thoughts and what we learned to provide an update. And it was, I will have to say, it was very informative and very interesting to see what's done in other jurisdictions.
Yes, good morning, thank you. Well, I welcome your additions to what I'll share. So there was a speaker who was sharing a study that he had done of school board, student reps around the was it just the Commonwealth? I think it might have been just the Commonwealth.
No, it was also some other, pulled in from other parts of the country.
Okay, thank you. And so I had asked, actually, I'd love to know which jurisdictions they had talked about because it would be good to follow up. I think one of the local school boards, though, is at Prince William, does have 2 representatives, so I think that would be a good step to ask them how they do it. Yeah, they had, I think there was a sample size of 7. So there were some really good anecdotes, but I know that we've had some of the conversations about having one or 2 reps or just other ways to involve. And we actually shared about our board student leadership program, and others were interested in that. So it was quite a lot, and I'll defer to you, Ms. St. John Cutting, if you would like to add something else.
I think what I found the most interesting was that, and I don't remember the school board, but the student representatives actually get a vote. And that was very interesting. I think that right now what we have to finalize is if the second student, and Mr. Moon had brought like geographical, jurisdictions, because our county is so big. So having one student represent one geographic area and another a different geographic area, because it would just make it mobility-wise for them easier to navigate. The timing of the election, and then deciding whether it would be equal representation or would it be a second or an alternative.
Yes, and so I did want to add, in addition to the webinar that we attended, I did speak with our staff in instructional services about the process of what is done now to elect a student representative, and asked about what it could be to have a second representative, and they would really need to think about it and look into it. As far as geography, I know I keep a spreadsheet of as many student reps back that I've served with, and they've all been pretty much from one part of the county. So if geography is a factor in anything, we could think about that even for the one student rep we do have. I think in the years I've been on the board, we had a student from the same high school twice, which is great. But, the process, and there was also a larger discussion about how students learn about the school board application process. I had a student ask me the other day, what I would suggest to them to be, an enticing candidate. And I said, it's out of my hands, like it's not the board. So I think there's work to do from the board side in both understanding the election process and in advocating for more accessibility and consistency, because I think it's done in different ways in different schools. And then also how we onboard that student. And, so this is a little bit of a different thing, but, I'd love to get really strong in how we support our one student before we add on a second. That might sound like a familiar argument for some of you. Um, and I know one of our past students, Pranav, he had done work to look into student rep voting rights. And so there's a movement to do that. So there's a lot that could be done. I just think that it has to also be feasible for our staff, and they really hadn't explored that before. So we left it as I was going to report back to you all here, and they're going to need more time. And like right now is the time that the students are, applying. So they're very busy doing that. So I think it'd have to wait until we go through this cycle of elections, and then perhaps with the fresh start, we can figure out how to find more options or just know what's possible.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I think, one of the issues, mentioned, voting rights of students came up before too, long ago for some conversation among board members. At the time, some of the things that we needed to consider was accountability, because we are all accountable to voters, and then we get voted out. We can get voted out, or we can stay on, or we can resign, however you want to do. But is there a similar accountability to a student rep who's going to be there for just 1 year? And if voting rights are given on all issues, what issues, and whether students will be permitted to attend closed sessions, so those things all came up as a part of discussing the voting rights of students. And at the end, the board did not entertain giving a voting rights. That was long ago. Okay, so we could, different board could do differently that. And what I have noticed over time is that different student reps do it different ways, but for lately, I have seen less participation on the part of a student rep to really speak on issues that the board members or the board is dealing with or are going to be voting on. So I'm hoping that, as we see more student voices to be reflected on the matters directly related to them, I'm hoping to have more student voices reflected, at least through the student rep, meaning that it may be difficult. It may not be easy for high school students to come to our meetings, many meetings, but in the past, we had regularly seen student rep come to our work sessions. Even for part of the day, they knew exactly when and what was scheduled on the agenda, and then find a time to come and stay here for an hour and say what he or she wants to say, and then go back to school, etc. Not easy thing for a high school kid to do because they got a tough schedule, but that is having more than one could make it easier. They could rotate around and see, come and let us know what students feel about certain issues. But that's a worth discussing.
I agree, because we're here for the students, and I think that I've participated in programming where the students, when they do speak up, it's amazing what they have to say, and the more that we can get from them, the more voice and the more perspective, the better we'll be able to do our jobs.
I agree. I think that I've been in support of this since we started talking about it, is in increasing the number of students that we have for a division as large as ours. I think that it's definitely something that we could entertain by having a larger student group that is able to give us feedback as to what they're hearing. That could be done in regular report outs from different organizations or different groups that are already meeting on a regular basis. And so that is something that we could further discuss in terms of just making sure that student voice is represented when we're speaking. I do agree with Ms. Marin that we need to make sure that we have consistency in the way the students are being identified at different schools. I do know, and even though I love that our high school brought two of them. It's a strong, but I do think that some of that comes from the leadership teachers' dedication to ensuring that students know that it's going on and encouraging students to do that. I know that's part of the pathway that happens, and we have particularly interested kids at that location. The other thing that I will say is I think that those pieces can be done in tandem. So I would love to see consistency in terms of getting information. I think we can start that with the student leadership program, ensuring that everybody knows. And I think that we've worked on some consistency issues there already. And so I think that those can be replicated when you're talking about the actual student rep that's put forward. I would love to see us do all of that work in tandem with figuring out how we would like to get more students that are actually available to come to the meetings in terms of having another rep. So I don't think that they have to be exclusive to each other. I think that we can do some of that work together. And so I would love to see maybe working on the consistency but with an eye towards adding something. The recommendation that I believe that Ms. Kareem gave us last year was related to having too many. She knew her section of the county better just because geographically she could get there. I think that splitting it into at least north, south, or east, west, however we want to do it, having it be two sections, I think that it makes the pool a little different, so you're getting kids from different locations. And so I think that it would be interesting to have kids kind of split so that they each take a side of the county. I do think that causes a problem with having one be considered an alternate, which is also something that we're going to have to tackle and figure out how to move forward with. When I was talking to Ms. Green about the options, one of the things that she recommended was having it be more of like basically each student rep would take one meeting a month, and that way we're not exclusively getting the voice from one, but they also can work out which one they're able to cover. And so it just makes it a little easier for them to manage the workload related to this. And there are lots of other meetings that they go to that I don't think that we have full visibility of. And so that's the other aspect that I would really like to see how we can make that happen.
So, this came up because a member worked with our student rep at the time to present the idea of should we have two reps? And I think, we're giving that consideration, but I don't know that yet I'm convinced that is the solution. When I look at the way that students are engaging in the current student leadership program, I think that is an excellent avenue. If the goal is to increase student voice, being on the board as a rep is not the only way. And I've long tried different ways to, have like 100 mil, one idea was like 100 mil student, group, or, we can also help by, so that's one thing. I'm not yet convinced about the two reps. And even I think I've spoken with our current rep and she has questions too. So I think getting more information about it, whether it's from Prince William and how they do it, but, I think, the voting item, we make fiduciary and legal commitments, so I don't know that that's appropriate for a student rep to be making those decisions. So I think our current rep does a great job at presenting things and going to all these other meetings. But I did want to share that at the end of the calendar year, just about a month ago, our current student rep and I outlined a whole bunch of ways that information could be better shared with especially high school students on all the opportunities. So whether that's applying for a governor's school in the summer or the applications to TJ or different types of internships. And one of the things was applying to be the student school board rep, because it is different the way that information is rolled out. So I've seen the superintendent does plan for next year to be more consistent in rolling out announcements of even coursework selection. So we together made a list of all those opportunities that are, school-based maybe, but also FCPS-based and even state-based. And so I would like to see it more consistent and get the practice so that it's, this is a big theme with us, right? The grading policy, it's always, how do we get consistency for access to these opportunities? So I would like to keep working on that angle. So I just wanted to share that update.
Yeah, Christina.
So one of our deputy clerks, Kevin Jackson, he's working with the student leadership program on this. One of the things I've tasked him with is starting to work on a student rep manual. So that's something that he's going to be starting to work on. A couple things that we've seen to the points that have been raised, things for the board to consider, whether the student rep should be a senior. Just because those who have been juniors tend to have more responsibilities with their classes. It does make it harder for them to come to work sessions and to go do things like school visits because their schedule is so packed. So that's something to think about, is whether it should be just for seniors. They seem to also have more abilities in terms of just transportation, quite frankly, because that does seem to be something with our younger students. One of the other things that we've seen that has been an issue is we don't usually, this year there's been a little bit more consistency, but we don't always get informed when even the election is happening. So we can't inform school board members to advertise to their communities because we're not informed. So having the clerk's office be more informed with things that are happening with the students would be more helpful as well, because then we can include things in chair's notes and other things, because I think that's one of the reasons students don't necessarily know about the opportunities, is because board members don't advertise them, and board members don't advertise them because we don't tell them, and we don't tell them because we don't know. So it's just something to consider.
And if Kevin is doing the handbook, that's something that would be put in the handbook, saying that when we're going to have elections, you need to notify.
The handbook is more designed for things for our student rep, it would help them with training, things that we're doing. I think one of the things that's come up recently with our current student rep and our former is their questions about PD, professional development opportunities. We don't have that in the budget for them right now. I think there were questions as to whether they would go to conferences like with the school board, which we said no, because they need to be in school. Now, if they found something during spring break that they wanted to attend, or something during a fall break maybe that they wanted to attend, but we would need to build that into our budget. So that's something else that I think the board needs to consider, is what kind of opportunities we want to provide to our student rep as well. They have opportunities through VSBA, and we've told Ms. Sawant, our current rep, that if she can find things virtually where she doesn't have to go places, because that makes it easier in terms of travel and makes it easier with her school, that we will help try to find funds for those. But I think that's something else we need to think about, is what we're doing there. And with the student leadership program, development leadership program that we have currently, we're making consistent improvements to that as well, since this is the first year we've resurrected it in, I think, 4 or 5 years. So we're working I know they had a meeting just last night, actually, where they had school board members talking to them about how to be better leaders.
Mr. Moon?
In terms of giving an opportunity to attend conferences, professional development, I understand a Christian is concerned about students needing to be in class. That goes to students' a inability to come to work sessions as well. But they come to work sessions with a permission from their schools, and they will carefully take a look at their coursework. When can I actually do this without really sacrificing their schoolwork? And they will make those decisions, and then we respect those decisions. And after all, it's a student rep represents close to 185,000 students. They're not elected by 180,000, but they represent all that. Attending a conference in Williamsburg or in Richmond, even though that may require more time off, I think providing that kind of opportunity will help someone grow as a future leader as well. Also get to see on a broad scale what the entire Commonwealth is dealing with, what the nation is dealing with, from different school districts and et cetera. So it may not be all 3 days, but it could be a day accommodating, and it will be up to the student representative. We're not forcing anyone to come, and the student representative again, just like if he or she wants to attend the work session and having to take a time off, it will be the same decision that person would have to make. I think providing, some opportunities for such growth will go a long way.
I will say when it comes to time off for school, then I think the board may need to make a directive because schools aren't consistent and whether they give their students the time off. And so if we are going to say that it's an excused absence, that might be something that needs to come from the board so that schools are more consistent, because you don't want one student being told that it's unexcused and another school saying it is excused.
Madam Clerk, do you know whether or not we have a policy specifically regarding the student rep? If we do, then
We do.
Then it probably needs to be something that we look at and when the last time that policy was revised, and whether or not there's additions that need to be added to the policy to protect those types of absences. Because while I understand that it's an absence from class, it's still something related to school that they're going to attend, similar to a field trip. So I do think that there are protections that we can put in place so that it gives direction to staff on how those absences should be treated.
So I think right now what we're going to be looking at is then just going out and getting a little bit more definition of where we can, getting some more information to bring back to the committee, and we can, define that so that we can come back, so we can have some better decision-making opportunities. And then, Madam Clerk, if you could just keep us updated on the student handbook, that would be helpful.
Will do. And we do have a policy. It's policy 1802. It was last updated in 2021. It is up for due January 1st, 2026, if we follow the 5 years.
Thank you. And I concur with Ms. Anderson. I think that education doesn't just occur within the walls of a school, and it would be a great educational opportunity for our student reps. So I think we're ready to move on to Community Advisory Committee Toolkit update, which I will hand over to Ms. Anderson.
Okay, so I went ahead and went through the operating manual again, just so that I could refresh all the different components that we are going to be developing in order to get this rolled out effectively with our communities. So I created a handout that you guys have and is on board docs that will actually outline each of the different components that the operating manual commits to, in addition to a few other things that I've noticed related to the changes that were made in the operating manual that will need to be adjusted in practice. So if we want to just run through them really fast, the toolkit, that is a toolkit for board members. It's not necessarily a toolkit for advisory committee participants or nominees. This is related to information that is helpful for board members. I see this as part of potentially the toolkit is actually related to determining who is going to be your appointee, but it doesn't necessarily encompass everything that could happen around these advisory committees to make it easier for us to find the information that would be helpful for us. So look, the historical layout of what all the reports have been, feedback from staff, like just in one location. So that way it was easy, particularly when you took over the liaison position for an advisory committee. You may not have the history, and trying to go back and find it all is sometimes difficult. And so we can kind of streamline that just a little bit. So I actually see this as part of a larger project that wouldn't actually be very difficult to pull together, and I think it would be very helpful for all of us. So, and I've started creating just a list of the things that I think should be included in the toolkit personally. So it would be the standard application, which is one of the things here, a copy of the operating manual so that everybody has a clear understanding of what we're doing, a description of each advisory committee along with the current charge for that year. And so that way it's one easy place, and then contact information for those committees. just so that if you were trying to determine a nominee for one of the committees, that it would be easy to put them in touch with the chair or in touch with the committee's email address. And so that's the type of information. Does anybody else have anything specific to the toolkit that would be helpful to include?
Yes. Potential applicants, appointees, a lot of times you want to know time commitment. Whether it's not just attending meeting, what sort of prep work, they need to do. So, because it's an important work, and if it's extensive commitment, it may give them a pause. And I, as a board member, not necessarily know, how much work is being done by different committees.
Do you think that that's possible, that it varies depending on which committee?
Sure,
it is?
but could I give an example of last year's, perhaps, right? And then, we could perhaps get that information from chairs from prior years, saying that yes, for each we meet on a monthly basis. Our committee meeting generally takes about 2 hours. For the prep work, probably additional 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours. Give that, then so that we want to be fair to our appointees who are volunteering, or we are encouraging to serve on the committee.
Yeah, we might be able to create some sort of guidance based on the committee and actually use the staff liaisons as a helpful person to kind of help us understand where all that's coming in. So I think that that's a really good point, is that we could almost make an information sheet about, here's the information. And I'm seeing this as part of the larger spreadsheet of contact, not to make the information overwhelming for board members, but to have just the information in one easy location. So the idea behind the toolkit originally was meant to make this process easier for people. So I think that that's a great point as to what should be included. Absolutely.
I was actually just literally responding to get my math resources committee person finalized. And I'm sitting here thinking about that. And, my office, we developed our own Google form. And it would be great to have a standard application form for the school board. And, if members don't want to use it, that's their option. But I think just having a drop-down menu, you could pick your district. I think that is a no-brainer. An option could also be to allow entry into a Word document, but also we should make it accessible if someone needs to apply in another format or a video. I know even with some of the students, for the leadership program, I said, if you want to submit a video, submit a video. So, but I really appreciate this, and I totally agree about the standard application. I think absolutely describing the language about the commitment. I think, sometimes we put that in the body of the form or we say it, but if we look at even the model that staff just used for that math basal resource appointment, that could be, a model. I also is, on the committee website, I know with the redone website, it's changed the location, and I don't think it's as noticeable as it used to be. It's kind of buried in a bullet, like here are the school board committees, and I think that should be way more front and center to find the committees. I also would like to know if this process for the community advisory committees could apply for when we do need to appoint constituents to more focused committees, such as curriculum review or challenge materials review, because that comes up. So can this be broad enough, and do we want to include that in here? It's not just advisory committees, it's these other committees, or can at least maybe the application be used for that in some way? And then finally, do you picture, Ms. Anderson, that this guide would include a description of the staff liaison's role as well as our clerks? Because that sometimes is a point of confusion for board members.
The operating manual already has that
It has
in there,
that.
but I do think that it would be important, because the other aspect that we haven't talked about is that there is some amount of staff liaison expectation that we have that we also should include. And so I do think that there is eventually room to with my training background, I always go to training first, but I do think that it would be an easy checklist that we could create for staff liaisons so that they understand what the expectations, because there are some changes that have been made in the operating manual related to that they are in charge of minutes and things like that. So they can appoint someone on each committee to be the one that takes the minutes, but they're responsible for ensuring that the minutes get to the clerk. And so understanding what your expectations are, I think is always best. And so I definitely think that that's something that could be included here. You brought up the standard application. I did the same thing with my curriculum review committee stuff that I utilized one. I think that the best bet, we can have one central, but the problem is that then we're putting more information on the school board office to maintain. I think that it would be awesome just to be able to have a template that we create that you can resave to be yours, and then you have control of all the people that come in for you. But it's just an easy way, because I did notice, based on which committee you're dealing with, you do have we will need a standard application, but there may be more that you want to put in as a question for your particular committee member.
I understand. I was thinking about that too. Here's the thing, like when we were doing the student leadership application, I would get emails from students who were not my constituents, and now I feel responsible for making sure they get to the correct place. And if there were a drop-down form with the link, I always use the county's My Neighborhood link to look up an address. That's one thing taken off of us to do, and the people get to the right place. So I don't know what the right solution is. It sounds like a standard application is something we want, and maybe we figure out the mechanics.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so good.
And I also think that we should help facilitate for the student, moving on to that, help the student rep to actually have, because there are student liaisons or student representatives appointed to each of the committees as well. And I think having the same type of toolkit available for the student rep, even though it wouldn't necessarily be in the same exact format, having those resources available for the student rep is going to be really important to ensure that they can easily pick, because they're actually under a tighter timeline than we are, because after the student rep gets picked, they have to turn pretty fast to try to get all those student representatives in place. And I think with the work that you're doing with Dr. Reed to ensure consistency of availability of those options and opportunities, I think that that's going to be a really important thing to happen. So one thing that is in the operating manual that we haven't really discussed as a board fully is the bylaws aspect. We determined when we were working on all of this, we discovered that we have some committees that have bylaws, some committees that don't have bylaws, and then this year I was made aware that we have some committees that have charters. And the problem is that's a whole lot of different direction, and I think that there should be some consistency between the committees dictated by us. And so I think giving bylaws, and we can take those committees that already have bylaws and create an example of and it could be a plug and play type of document where we can create that document and then they can just decide on the things that are in there. I think creating a standard set of bylaws in terms of expectations and things like that would also be helpful, and then they can add their flavor on top of it. So I think that there's lots of things like that. But I was wondering what you guys thought about whether or not when we have folks that have, or committees that have charters, how is that different than a set of bylaws?
So I have not read those charters, but which committees do have charters?
As far as I know, at least FPAC has a charter.
FPAC.
Because there was
And then
some,
their own created charter.
from what I understand, which I'm not 100% sure how that is different than the board charge, because I really see the charge and the bylaws working together, but I'm not 100% sure I understand how the charter works within the bylaws.
Because
and
FPAC is something created by the board.
It is.
Not the community, and then coming to us to help us. So I don't know how they get to have a charter.
Me neither. So that was the question that I had, is so I do think that we need to determine.
Whether they are using the charter as their bylaws, just naming it a charter as opposed to.
That's a good question. I don't know. And
Okay.
that's what my question is if we are going to give them the language of bylaws, that everyone, all the different advisory committees are expected to have bylaws, if that's the case, then we need to help everybody understand that that's the expectation and not necessarily a charter, because I do see them as different, so.
Just as a heads up, the FPAC charter is actually coming to CPDC this week. So this may be a question we need to solve sooner rather than later. because I know that Mr. Jackson has let me know that one of the reasons CPDC needs to meet as soon as possible is to deal with the FPAC charter that was just approved by FPAC.
I think, Madam Chair, you would have to have a conversation with Mr. Dunn, quick.
I guess my question, is there a legal difference between a charter and bylaws?
I mean, I would say that charter is usually a document that will create something, but that was created by the board, not by itself, not the
Right.
community members gathering together and that we will do this and they will create this and they will help the school board.
Right.
That's not the day that was created. And then under charter, something is created, you could have more minute detail included bylaws and et cetera. But since I haven't seen these charters of FPAC, I don't know whether it's more like a bylaws and they're calling it charters because they're not creating this.
Right.
And Madam Clerk, the bylaws, the charter can be approved by CPDC, but it would have to come up to the full board for full approval, correct?
That is my understanding. I think it's coming to CPDC for CPDC to approve, and then it should be coming, but I do need to double check with Mr. Jackson that that is the intent.
And I do understand that those two committees work differently. One standing committee, one advisory committee work differently together. But I do think that it's a good point, is that if all of the advisory committees are board directed, then I do think that it is important to make sure that I am fine if there is language in the charter that would be similar to what would be included in the bylaws, and if it's just semantics, that we can just call it bylaws and move forward. I do get nervous about whether or not we are going to have some sort of external direction to the committee that the committee has created itself. It kind of changes the dynamic of how that committee is working.
And do its own work as opposed to what the board wanted to do.
Which is problematic because it's
and then, because they're gonna also consume our staff's time as well.
Yep, I agree. So I do think that we maybe is there a way to, Christine, is there a way to request or figure out which committees have charters? Because I was under the impression that FPAC wasn't the only one.
We're not sure if FLECAC has one.
Well, I have something that I would like to bring up about FLECAC in just a second, but that's a different discussion in just a sec.
But we
so we'll
can
get there.
check with the staff liaisons to
Okay.
see. I can ask the deputies to check in with their respective committees to see who has bylaws and who has charters and who has
Nothing. Well, because that is part of it, is that I assume that there are some committees out there that don't have either. And we need to, this is an alignment opportunity for all of us to make sure that we're all headed in the right direction as we move forward. Can I get can I ask that the chair gets general consensus as to whether or not we want to move towards just having everybody have bylaws?
Right. That's what I was going to say. I was like, part of what this board has been doing is, and since I've come on board, is trying to get consistency across the board so that everyone is aligned. And I appreciate that you have seen and pointed out to us that there are some committees that have charters and some that have bylaws, and it shouldn't be both. It should be one or the other. So yes, if we can get consensus that we want that alignment.
Yes.
Well, I have a larger question, and I'm trying to ground it in this aspect of how to receive the best value from these advisory committees, from these constituents who are trying to inform us. And I'm thinking about some committees that the superintendent runs, and she is meeting with them on a regular basis. Like, I think that's called the quad, meetings, where she's in a portion of the county every quarter. I'm thinking of the community boundary advisory meeting, the student reps meeting, even the principals. And even before I was elected and starting 2020, I had served on an advisory committee and had lots of ideas on how I thought it could be better used. And I think we've made some progress in not relying just on that report as the be-all, end-all, and we're going to have a focused set of days on that later. But I think the benefit of these groups also is hearing from them and engaging with them throughout the year. So I attend as many advisory committee meetings as I can for my committee. But I wonder, do we need bylaws for a group that is meant to advise us? I don't really know, and I'm not ready to give consensus on it. It raises the bigger question of, do we have topical areas that are best serving us right now? I mean, we've talked about, should we have a technology-focused advisory committee? Is it appropriate to have two committees focused, well, one's an advisory committee on facilities and one's our board committee on facilities? Is that still necessary given all that's changed, including way more data about our capital programming and the boundary work? It's like we're working on it all the time, and we have all these other advisories. I'd really like, so one thing at a time. I think, yes, let's do the operating manual, but maybe in the next month or two, can we start to think about what would it look like to talk with our colleagues and put up a process to say, are these the right topical areas for this time for this school division? But I would love to see us do something more where it's, like, I know in the past, some members have had a quarterly meeting with all of their advisory committee members. Now, I don't know if that is interesting for everyone, because if you're interested in facilities and then you're talking about family life ed, but I try to do that, one-off with a constituent, but it's hard to do that, and I wonder, is there a better way to do this? Could we have quarterly meetings with, the board and our committee members? I don't know, but I just think this approach is kind of, I don't want to say stale, but it needs some rethinking. And I think the toolkit is a great step for having us rethink, because we're asking people to give up their time away from their families, and just one report is not often the biggest return on their investment. So what do you all think about that?
The thing I wanted to mention was the bylaws are already currently in the operating manual. So if we decide that we want them taken out of the operating manual, the reason that we ensured that was still there is because we have many committees that feel strongly that the bylaws that they have created are important to them. And the reason that I liked the bylaws when I was talking to different groups, when I went in depth with this last year, is the idea is that it gives their group members an understanding of their process. And it also gives them, we gave some latitude in the operating manual to allow for the timing of speakers, how many public speakers you could have, how long they could speak. There are rules that are specific to each individual group that as to how they want to deal with it, depending on their topic. We have some community advisory committees that have a ton of outside interest. ACSD is one of them. They have a ton of people that come and talk. So they need a place to codify rules that are related to how they operate.
Well, I agree, but the state-sanctioned ones are in a different category, like advisory or ACSD. But also on that matter, I mean, even the name, the Advisory Committee for Students with Disability, is different than the state's name for it. Yes. So it gets confusing to some who are in that, world, like, oh, you mean that's the state-sanctioned committee. So there are just these things that, if it's a state-mandated, sure, then they've got to have definitely the clarity. But again, even if there are bylaws, fine, but a bylaw charter, I'm not really sure. I'd be open to considering if, what they need and what's consistent, right? Let's stick with that theme of consistency.
Could we ask whether or not, is it okay with you if I ask all of the advisory committees to provide me a copy of what they currently have? And that way we can kind of do a deep dive to figure out what's being done, because I agree, the intention behind this was that the board was going to approve bylaws. I don't think that's been done up to this point. I think that they've just been approved by the committees themselves, which I do think goes outside the realm of what we're looking for. I do think that there's some amount of oversight that we need to be able to provide to our committees. I know that the committees do a ton of work, and many of them have served on these committees for many, many years. So I don't want it to be absent of their voice in some of this. But I do want to make sure that we do have the consistency. So I think that the next step on the bylaws would be to collect what exists, and then I can bring them back, we'll synthesize and bring them back, and I can look for commonalities in those documents. And so that way we can come up with a path forward. But I would like to put down that we do have this in the operating manual right now. It was considered as part of the decision last year. And so that is why I included it here, is just to make sure that we keep on track with that. Committee websites is the same. We want to make sure that we have a consistent consistent information that is outlined in the operating manual. And so what I'm suggesting for that is that we create a checklist that the chair and the liaison would use together to make sure that we had all the information that was appropriate on all of the websites, and create kind of a consistency of look so that it's easy to find information when you go from one committee to another. There's a quarterly email update template that we were going to create that gave just a form that your liaison could send you about, here are the things that we're talking about, or just general. This may not be necessary. I have several of my committee appointees that are awesome about keeping me up to date, and I have others that I don't hear from very often. And so trying to create some consistency that board members can use or not, and we can give that to both them. The other aspect of this is, how are we going to train all of the committee members as to what this information is? And so how can we make sure that they get it across? And that's where I definitely want feedback from you guys of, what should that look like? How are we going to synthesize? Obviously, they'll receive a copy of the full operating manual, but how do we synthesize it down to be digestible, particularly for new members? I would very much like to have this done before the new folks come on August 1st. And so that's a little bit tighter of a timeline to see what we need to get developed. But if you guys have any ideas about how we might want to do that, that would be awesome. My inclination would be to create kind of like a cheat sheet for the document and kind of point out the points that are board facing, and then here are the responsibilities of your board member, here are your responsibilities, here's your staff liaison responsibilities.
I mean, this may be coming down to when the school board members actually have all their appointees lined up and have them appointed, because sometimes we have difficulties filling certain positions, right? But answering your question, if there could be, before they actually start their work in August or September, if there could be a orientation for all the advisory committee meetings and someone from school board, office, whether it's a chair or PAC committee chair, could come and share with them the expectations from the board, and also explain them the information that are being given to them as a tools that should be looking at and should be using. I mean, they will help them to.
I think the intention was to create kind of a webinar to do it, and then record the webinar so that it could be utilized to create a class that was just a quick training that was available for people that came on after the fact. Is that still, that was the direction that the committee had come up with last year? Is that still something that you guys think would work? Is to kind of, so you create that the real time.
But at the same time, giving those committee members, if they have a question to ask, questions to ask rather than jumping into something. Right.
It would be a moderated group, so I think that would be a really easy way to do that.
Right.
And then we could use that to create an FAQ.
We're not going to force everybody to attend, but if the brand new appointees doing the first time might benefit from such opportunities. And I was going to go to if I may, what Melanie said earlier about how we can best utilize the work of the committees. What the committee members they put in a lot of their time as volunteers to help us is that correct me if I'm wrong, but I still don't see it. This has been a consistent challenge over many years. So it's not just this board or pandemic board, but going back to mid-1990s. So committee members do a lot of work on the charges we give to them. And at the end of the school year, they bring back reports to us. And then we jam them in 2-3 nights or 2-3 days, and then we get a lot of reports, and board members have a tough time being able to digest all of those. And then we get, sometimes in the reports themselves, we get staff's responses to their recommendations. It's that their comments, or we get those responses subsequently later, 2 months down the road, etc. But if the advisory committees are there to advise the school board and bringing recommendations to school board gotta provide its actions, responses to their recommendation. That part has been pretty lacking because I guess we are all busy. Board members are both busy because that may require, scheduling additional meetings. But I don't think we have given a try. Each response time by the board does not have to be 2 hours long, or even an hour long. But I think those committee members deserve more respect from us of their work because they are advising us, but we're not really saying to them whether we're going to do it or not going to do it, or thank you, no thank you, or we don't do that other than those brief period of time when we have Q&A. And so we are just very quickly go through reports, ask a few questions, and go to the next one, and then put it aside. I mean, that's been the consistent way of things handled over the years. I think we gotta be able to do it better than that.
So I'm just going to talk about my past experience when I worked with some advisory boards, and also what I'm learning now being on the school board. A lot of the recommendations that come forth take time, and I'm just going to speak specifically to when we were looking at parent liaisons and getting them a contract. It took several advisory committees came up with the recommendation that should happen, but it took some time for that to happen because there's the budgetary constraints, there's a lot of things that go on. And so I think I agree with you that we have to have a response. But there are some things that I'm realizing that we can't act on immediately, but we can be working on, and we can say, okay, we're working on it, help us, as their charges are going, how can we move this forward? And I know for the parent, now the family liaison position, I think it took a good 7 years for it to get to, it's still not where it should be because not all schools have a full-time family liaison, but I know when I was working on that, and I know that there were several advisory committees that were recommending this is, all schools should have a full-time family liaison, but there were budgetary constraints. There was a lot of hoops that had to be overcome that still have not been overcome. So I think what's important for us to communicate to the advisory committee reports is that we're working on it, and that we're going to take that some we can act on immediately and some it's going to take time. I mean, I'm just talking from my experience.
I know Melanie has a backup, but if I could just respond quickly, that could be our response. Right. That could be way. It sounds like based upon information we got from the staff, that's going to require us to invest another $50 million, and which we don't have, and they may require 10-year approach, 5-year approach. You ask for 100 positions, maybe we start with the 5 positions. I know it's a small portion, I think there's another issues that I think is more urgent for us to deal with, so I will put that, somewhere, set that aside, but we'll work on these. Something we need to, I think, because we are respecting their work, but we're not really responding to, their work.
I appreciate that point, Mr. Moon, and I agree with you. And just getting back to the idea of how we more regularly interact, like what if the advisory committee, what if in the month of January, February, each of us goes to our committee, but the structure of that is like a feedback session and a discussion. And it could be more than one of us, right? Because we wouldn't need quorum because we're not voting. It could be, it could be advertised as a public meeting, so any of us could go. But it's spreading that out, and then we do that again in May or June, or we just do it in May or June. Now, the benefit of that is if we're talking in January, February, that could inform the budget process. And then if it's May or June, well, we've got the budget behind us and now we're looking at the next year. I would probably want a richer facilitated dialogue over a report. Or at least maybe it's a short memo that they're providing. But I've seen mixed things, like I've seen some committees give really outstanding recommendations, and yes, staff has responded, but yeah, what does the board do? There's a lot of information we get that we don't always act on. I've talked about with the CIP, we have 300 pages of recommendations and input from the superintendent that we haven't yet looked at in a year. So there's that whole idea of how did the board respond to, input that we're getting. But again, just looking at other models of committees, again, like even if I went to all my advisory committees, it's just me, but I'm writing here now, I'm like, okay, I want to make sure that I update my colleagues on this, this, and this, but then we're back to all of us, we need to check in together. So I appreciate calling it out that it's board behavior, but I do wonder if even for this coming year, I know, again, we have these 2 Saturday meetings, which are a challenge for me personally to attend, but could we have, maybe 4 of us go to, the Advanced Academic Committee and 5 go to the other one? Because I think what people really want is that FaceTime and to be heard and have a dialogue. And maybe it's not us saying we're going to adopt these recommendations, but we're going to really be informed by what they've done.
And I will say that I think that that's part of the intention behind the quarterly update, is that the committee would have the ability to create that document that gives us an update, and then it would be sent to all board members. So at least then that is a step towards the right direction that I think is sustainable at this point, where we can build it into something bigger as we move through, but at least getting those quarterly updates, this is how it's going, this is, these are the issues that we're determining, that, these are the research points, like those are the types of things that gives us a way to just have some feedback from them as we're moving forward. So if you guys have ideas, that's it's one of the smaller portions of what we need to do here. So if you have ideas of what should be included in that quarterly email template, please let me know. And so that way, when we're creating that document, that they could utilize. And I intend for that to be like a 1-page, pretty easy to do kind of thing, but just gives the board a fair amount of information. I haven't been a liaison to an actual advisory committee yet because I've been in other things. And so it's very possible, like some of us just don't know how they work. And it could be that they don't have any update that they need to provide, because if you're talking quarterly and that's in the fall, they may not have anything for us yet. But it could be that they let you know what guest speakers they're hoping to do. Are we having any retreats, upcoming events, that kind of thing. I went to the FPAC retreat last year, and it was awesome to hear the guest speaker that they brought in that was talking about the PPE opportunities that they were utilizing in their division. So there's some really cool stuff that we could look at. And so I think that you're 100% right, getting a way to hear those updates as we go. It gives people the interest. All of these meetings are public. So they're already published that way. So any of us could go to anything, and we just need to figure out which ones we're really excited about going to see because they're bringing in a guest speaker or they're doing. That's the type of stuff that I would love to hear populated more often. So
we do get the staff responses from the recommendations, but we usually get those in September, October. We do post them to board docs. One of the things I will say is looking through them, sometimes they agree, sometimes they don't, but we don't necessarily give a board response to the recommendations. So that may be something that board members want to think about as well, right? Like the staff's responding, but once we get the staff response, even if it's the next fall, whether, considering what the staff have to say and then figuring out if the board wants to give a response, because I think that is sometimes different. One of the other things that was done under the past board is Ms. Omesh, when she was on the board, was working with Ms. Tolan to try to get things incorporated into the budget, because that was some of the concerns that were raised too, is that ideas were coming forward, they had budgetary implications, and the board wasn't really doing anything with them. So that's something else to consider.
So again, getting staff to response is one thing, but boards responding is another. Board could disagree with the staff. A board could disagree with the advisory committees, but whether it's a half an hour or a 1 hour session, have that and giving something back. Could it be a one thing? There could be nothing, or there could be tons, but that's all depending upon how we want to control our time. But I think in as much as we tell our appointee that we appreciate their work by actually putting into an action, by letting them know how we are reacting to their recommendation, I think hasn't been done I haven't seen that being done, but I think if this board can do it, that will be a huge milestone.
I concur. It's a level of respect and gratitude that is invaluable.
Okay, so one of the other things that I asked Ms. St. John Cunning to put on the agenda for today was related to something that we had discussed previously, but I wanted to bring back up as when I was going through all of these documents again, it again reiterated the forum topic that I brought up last year related to which advisory committees we have and things like that. I would like to make a motion that the board recommend that the FLECAC advisory committee be converted into a curriculum committee, curriculum review committee, the same way as every other one. Right now, this is the only curriculum review committee that sits with the board. All changes related to FLE would still have to come to the board for a vote, but I have spoken with the superintendent, and I have requested, and whether or not she would agree to us moving this into a curriculum review committee that is the same as every other curriculum review committee that we have, that gives the committee the space to have the conversation about their curriculum before. It would still have our appointees the same way as the math and social studies are doing now. But it would give them the space to have the conversation about what needs to be in the curriculum without the intense public scrutiny, particularly for this topic that's going on. And I will renew my concern about the fact that we have students that are on this committee, and I would like to make sure that they are protected as they are moving forward, that just the nature of having it be an advisory committee forces it in a very public way, rather than giving the space, and then the board will discuss what the curriculum recommendations are without the focus on our appointees and the students. So I am making a motion that I would request that we send a recommendation to the full board that this be transferred into, we would maintain all of everything is going to act the same way, because this is actually the only committee we have that's in regulation. And so it's already being acted on as if it's the superintendent's committee. It's just right now it lives under us. So I appreciate that.
Is there a second?
Well, we got to figure out the exact language, but yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you for doing that and that analysis. I agree, it gets outsized attention and it gets pretty ugly, and that's not fair for anyone who's volunteering their time. So would it meet regularly, or would it come together when there are, in fact, changes like this Math Basel committee?
I think that from what I understand, I'm not sure that the functionality of the committee would change in any way, except for the fact that they would have the opportunity to actually examine their work in a way and then bring the full recommendation to the board. This, again, is a different committee than any other. This is the only one that is, the chair is a staff member. It's already acting as a curriculum review committee in the same way that the math or the Basel or the social studies would. This just changes the functionality to be in line with the curriculum review. And I did determine last year when I was working heavily on the operating manual, there is no legal requirement for us to have an advisory committee. The legal requirement is that we have FLE and that we vote on FLE when changes are made outside the state requirements. And so we would still be doing everything, and it still is our decision. This just changes the actual way that the committee is working.
Well, you had me at consistent, so.
So are we prepared to take a vote on this?
I'm not going to support that, but I'm prepared to vote.
Okay. So
Can we get the exact language?
I make a motion that the chair of the PET committee takes a recommendation to the full board to convert the Family Life Education Advisory Committee to being a curriculum review committee under the superintendent's office. And and I would like to add, in line with all other curriculum review committees. Or and I will send out information to the board that explains the nuances of the fact that it would keep, and I will talk to the superintendent about how we want to do that, but it would keep the same structure. It's just whose office it sits under.
That's not the part of the motion, right?
No, that's my explaining what I'm going to do next.
Okay, all those in favor? Right? Oh. Okay. And this is where I asked, you want to speak to your motion?
Can I, just a point of order, I want to make sure that I understand this correctly because we haven't done this type of motion coming out of PEC before. Is the motion to take it to the full committee, or is the motion to actually change the language of the governance manual to adopt this change? But that's what I am asking for, a clarification of just the process.
Could I, as far as the language is concerned, could I suggest that for your consideration, a motion to state that PEC, PEC is the name of the committee, right? PEC recommends to the full board to convert fully CAT to, and the rest of them is.
Well, to adjust all, well, it's about adjusting all governing documents to move FLECAC.
So it's not chair of the public engagement committee, but it is
Yes.
moves that the
Yes.
public engagement committee recommends to the full board to convert. That's the motion. Our committee is
Yes, I got you.
recommending.
Always the lawyers that
And
have the
adjust
language.
all governing documents, because this is going to need to be changed in the policy, the operating manual, and the,
I mean, this, as technical as that is, like, this is actually what the governance committee is discussing. What's the format when we do things for changes? And so I would think that, if we're going to convert something, all the things are going to have to be changed. So I don't particularly think it needs all the technical, like, let's list out every place it has to be changed everywhere, because then what about
agree.
training, and what about, we want to recommend to the board that the board direct the superintendent to, right, because the superintendent's going to have to,
the regulation already exists.
Okay.
Nothing with that is going to have to change. It's only our documents that would have to change, and PEC was in charge of making all those changes to those documents. We did not send that through governance last year. So that's why I'm saying that we're going to recommend that we do it, that we'll bring the changes with us. So,
I mean, technically, we got to adjust the governing documents, you have to communicate it out. I mean, do we want to list all the steps it's going to take, or we're just saying, we're going to, what I'm saying, like, how micro do we need to get in the list of to-dos?
well, logistically, I'm asking how we did it when we removed HRAC. When we removed HRAC, we actually just changed the only thing we voted on was changing the actual documents.
We changed the governance manual and we changed the policy
Right.
in order to do it. So we could do it a few different ways. You could do it that you recommend to the full school board to convert FLECAC, and so that's why I add it, and adjust all governing documents to be in line with the change. And then that way, to Ms. Marin's point, you don't have to list everything.
That's fine.
That way, it gets to what we're trying to do,
I
which
think-
would be the governance manual. And, right, so you're recommending to the full school board. So what we can do there is, after you have your motion, we can then I can work with Ms. St. John Cunning to make sure that we have the documents that need to be, so that when you bring the motion to the full board, everything is posted on board docs accordingly.
Absolutely. And I'm happy to help you with the red line on that.
So does this motion work? Ms. Marin, you're good seconding? Okay.
And would you like to speak to your motion? Okay, so we already voted, didn't we? No? Okay, so all those in favor? Opposed? Oh, abstained? Okay. So 3, 4, 1 abstain. What is? Three in favor, 1 abstain. The motion carries, right? The motion passes. I'm learning the lingo here.
And those are all the updates that I have related to the operating manual.
I'm looking at this very quickly. Give me 1 second. So I just wanted to mention on the part of what we were looking at, the structure and framework, which Ms. Anderson was discussing, and where we were talking about the user experience and where the minutes and agendas were all posted. We've started an audit to see how that's all done. Again, going to consistency that we will bring back to tell you where everything is and see how we can have that consistency for ease of access to the public in terms of making sure, again, like we were talking, is it on Board Docs? Is it on the webpage? How is it done? And so we're working on doing that audit right now. And as far as, I think that is all that I have today. If there's anything else that anybody is interested in bringing up and discussing. I know we all want to get on the road before the storm.
Yes, this was a stormy session, so.
Yes, this is a storm. Well, this was the calm before the storm. So the February 11, 2025 meeting of the Fairfax County School Board Public Engagement Committee is adjourned at 11:13. The next meeting of the Public Engagement Committee will be held on March 18th, 2025. Be safe, stay warm.
You know, how we conduct this meeting, PAC committee, is a model for all other committees.
Thank you, guys.